My thanks to all of you, and now it's on to Chicago, and let's win there. People in the Democratic Party and the people in the United States want to change. The country wants to move in a different direction. We want to deal with our own problems within our own country, and we want peace in Vietnam. So, my thanks to all of you, and now it's on to Chicago, and let's win there.
You know, when the Senate presiding officer is called the president, when somebody says, Mr. President, 100 pairs of eyes look up. To some extent, you begin to think that what you say is important and significant. I think it's at times frustrating, the fact that you can't get more done in your country or an area of the country would be better off, or a group of people or part of our city would have better lives if we took a particular course of action. And it's much more possible to take an action and see some results from it immediately.
What I think is quite clear is that we can work together in the last analysis, and that what has been going on within the United States over the period of the last 3 years, the divisions, the violence, the disenchantment with our society, the divisions, whether it's between blacks and whites, between the poor and the more affluent, or between age groups, or in the war in Vietnam. As the chief law officer of the American government, I am particularly interested to know, too, and to that series of actions, beginning with the Marshall Plan, which have brought about the extraordinary political... My thanks to all of you, and now it's on to Chicago, and let's win there. Ignorance, disease, hunger, and want, and freedom has shown mankind the most effective way to destroy these ancient antagonists. The free way of life proposes ends, but it does not prescribe means. It assumes that peoples and nations will often think differently, have the full right to do so, and that diversity is the source of progress. It believes that men advance by discussion, by debate, by trial, and by error. It regards the free individual as the source of creativity.
I run because it is now unmistakably clear that we can change these disastrous, divisive policies only by changing the men who are now making them. I cannot stand aside from the contest that will decide our nation's future and our children's future. The remarkable New Hampshire campaign of Senator Eugene McCarthy has proven how deep are the present divisions within our party and within our country. At stake is not simply the leadership of our party and even our country. It is our right to the moral leadership of this planet.
For the people of Berlin, the erection of that wall was, of course, an affront and a source of anguish. But I can report to you from around the world, from my travels through Asia, for the first time in the history of mankind,
in compassion toward one another, and a feeling of justice toward those who still suffer within our country.
I do not run for the presidency merely to oppose any man, but to propose new policies.
the inadequacy of human compassion, the defectiveness of our sensibility toward the sufferings of our fellows, they mark the limit of our ability to use knowledge for the well-being of our fellow human beings throughout the world.
One committed to participating in public life can sit on the sidelines with so much at stake.
Last night I sent to the President the following telegram. Mr. President, first of all, let me say that I fervently hope that your new efforts toward peace in Vietnam will succeed. Your decision regarding the presidency, they want peace in Vietnam, produced not by surrender of either side, but by a negotiated settlement. I have long urged that we make the first step in this direction by a de-escalation of our military effort, halting the bombing of the North, insisting upon reforms in the South, and pressing for negotiations with all parties looking toward a transfer of the present conflict from the military to the political arena. I am hopeful that the actions announced by the President will prove to be a step toward peace, reconciliation at home, and the participation in the life of our country that is the deepest desire of the American people and the truest expression of our national goals. In this spirit, I will continue my campaign for the presidency of the United States.
One important new direction was President Johnson's proposal last fall, resubmission of this proposal.
It's not just a question of expenditure of funds, it's a question of the interest by the state and by the federal government. So, I mean, if we're in the primaries to present our candidacy to the people to see if we can gain support from the people, I think it's been quite clear where the support has gone.
The war in Vietnam is going to have to be won in the South, and that effort is going to be successful only with military action plus political action. And a military action or effort through bombing or accelerated bombing, extending of the bombing in North Vietnam, is not going to be the solution or an answer for political action in South Vietnam.
The primaries have indicated, as I said, that the Democratic Party, the rank and file want to move in a different direction, in a new direction, and I think it would be a very bad mistake if that was ignored by the delegates at Chicago. What we have here, of course, is a considerable amount of hunger. We have the children with distended stomachs in the large cities of the country, particularly in the north, where there is poverty. Still people can live on welfare so that the children don't suffer. So, as I say, I think it's a terrible reflection on our society. I think that one of the great problems is for most of us as American citizens, we don't run across it. We don't, for a citizen living under reasonably good conditions in our big cities, we don't pass through Bedford-Stuyvesant, we don't pass through Harlem. For a citizen living here in the state of Mississippi, you don't ordinarily run up against, if you're doing reasonably well, you don't run up against this kind of poverty. And certainly people elsewhere in the country have very little personal knowledge or information about it. And I said to myself that I'd abide by California. Hubert Humphrey got out after he was beaten in West Virginia. He could have gone on. And obviously it's up to the individual to decide that. But if we're interested in the cause, if we're interested in the country and we're interested in the direction that we want the United States to move in, each one of us has to examine our own conscience and decide how that can best be done. And we've gone through these contests. We've presented ourselves to the voters and permitted the voters to decide. That's the purpose of the primaries, and the voters have made their judgment. I wouldn't put it in those terms so much as I put it in terms that I think the primaries have indicated all across the country that the country and the Democratic Party wants to move in a different direction than they have over the period of the last 3 years. I think for the Democratic Convention and the delegates of the Democratic Convention to ignore that quite clear mandate, I think would be a terrible mistake. I think that if we look at the record of all of the primaries and how we've done respectively, that I think that I would hope that perhaps I have great respect for Senator McCarthy. I have the greatest respect for those who have been associated with him in the effort. I would hope that perhaps we could get together now after these primaries are completed and finished and start to work together to build up forces which would bring the Democratic Convention in a different direction than it's apparently headed, at least at the moment.
If we learned anything in the last summer and over the period of the last 30 years, what we've been doing hasn't been the answer. Perhaps it's been helpful, but what we've been doing has not been the answer. And we can't just continue doing just the same thing that we've been doing for the last 3 decades and hope that eventually all these problems are going to disappear, because as I said earlier, the Labor Department has said that the problem is getting worse, not better. The unemployment rate of those living in the ghetto is not going down despite the poverty program, despite all of these other programs. The unemployment rate is going up. The educational system is not getting better. The housing is not getting better. In the city of New York, we went from 420,000 dilapidated units to 540,000 dilapidated units since 1960. Now, I'm a Democrat and I support the Democratic administration. But the fact is that despite this legislation, we haven't moved in the right direction. I support a lot of this legislation. But I think that we have to use, find some different ideas, use some imagination. And it doesn't necessarily mean that what we've been doing for the last 30 years is necessarily correct.